Aaliyah arrived and found me sitting in the dark. "Mom, why is there nothing to eat in the house? You get $8,000 in pension every month." Suddenly, Clarissa, my daughter-in-law, appeared with that familiar, arrogant smile. "I control every dollar she receives," she said, her voice sugary sweet but dripping with disdain. Aaliyah removed her earrings. Just that one small motion, but enough to shut Clarissa up. The doorbell rang at 2:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, and I almost didn't want to get up. Standing up from the sofa meant leaving the only warm spot I had managed to create under 2 blankets and 3 layers of sweaters. These days, every bit of warmth felt as valuable as gold, but the bell rang again, more insistent this time, and I recognized that pattern. Aaliyah always rang twice. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders and shuffled to the door. Aaliyah stood on the porch, both hands full of grocery bags. Her expression shifted from surprise to something darker as she looked closely at me. I knew what she was seeing. Oversized sweaters hanging off a body that had grown thin, wrinkled jeans even though I had tightened the belt, and deep hollows in my cheeks that, just 6 months ago, had been full mom. Aaliyah's voice was flat. Not a question, not a scolding, just my name, holding everything she hadn't said yet. I stepped aside to let her in. Aaliyah walked straight to the living room, staring at the thermostat blinking 58 degrees Fahrenheit. She set the bags down, stood still for a few seconds, then turned back to face me. Her jaw tightened. She had the exact same expression her father used to wear when he fought to control his anger. "Why is it this cold, Mom? It's only 40 degrees outside. Living like this is how people get pneumonia." I opened my mouth to offer the excuse I had practiced over and over, that I liked cooler air, that I was saving money for other things. But before I could speak, Aaliyah was already walking into the kitchen. I heard the fridge door open. A sharp, panicked breath followed. Aaliyah turned back with an expired milk bottle and 3 packets of ketchup in her hands. "Mom, where is your food?" "I still have some crackers in the cupboard," I said softly. "And a little rice, too." Aaliyah immediately pulled out her phone. I didn't even have time to stop her before she called Trayvon. He picked up on the second ring, his voice echoing faintly through the speaker. "Aaliyah, what's going on?" "What's going on?" My daughter's voice was so sharp it felt like it cut through the air. "What's going on is that Mom is sitting in a freezing house wearing 3 layers of sweaters, and the fridge is completely empty except for condiments. That's what's going on." I heard Trayvon sigh, as if this were nothing but a minor inconvenience. "Look, Clarissa handles all of Mom's finances now. It's easier that way. You know how Mom sometimes gets confused with bills." "Confused?" Aaliyah almost laughed, but it was the kind of laugh with no humor at all. "She was an accountant for 30 years. Try saying that again." The sound of high heels clicking on the wooden floor echoed just before Clarissa appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was smiling, one of those smiles that made my stomach twist. Clarissa looked at Aaliyah, then at me, then back at Aaliyah, each glance filled with that familiar smugness. "Is there a problem?" Clarissa asked, her voice sweet as honey. "There is. There's a problem," Aaliyah replied, face expressionless. "Why is my mother being starved? She gets $8,000 in pension every month. That is more than enough for her to live comfortably." Clarissa leaned casually against the doorframe, as if none of this was surprising. "Well, someone has to manage that money responsibly. If she handled it herself, she'd just waste it. Besides, I consider it fair compensation for allowing her to continue living in this house. Do you know how expensive elder care is these days?" It felt like the floor beneath me trembled. Allowing? The house that David, my late husband, and I bought 40 years ago? Aaliyah stood still, her face so blank I recognized it instantly. That was the same look she had when she was 12, the day Billy Henderson pushed her little brother off the slide. Her eyes had been just as cold then as they were now. "Aaliyah," I whispered, but she didn't look at me. What happened next? The silence, Aaliyah's slow movement as she removed her earrings, and the way she stared directly at Clarissa. was the moment the air in the house seemed to freeze completely. I knew Clarissa thought she had won. But what I didn't know was that in that exact moment, Aaliyah decided to change everything. Before continuing this story, I want to tell you about my life, before everything went downhill, before the peace in this house disappeared, before Clarissa walked into our lives and turned everything upside down. I am Margaret Reddick, 70 years old. I have lived in this house in the Glenville neighborhood of Cleveland for 45 years with my husband, Bernard. We bought it in 1980 when Trayvon was 2 years old and Aaliyah was still in my belly. Bernard worked as a welder at the Ford plant, and I was an accountant for a small transportation company downtown. We weren't wealthy, but we were happy. I still remember those Saturday mornings when Bernard made pancakes for the whole family. Trayvon sat on his lap, and Aaliyah stood on a chair to flip the pancakes. Laughter filled this kitchen. The smell of butter, the maple syrup, as if it still lingers somewhere, just waiting for me to close my eyes. Christmas of 2015 was our last family photo. The four of us stood next to the tree, and Bernard wore the ugly red sweater I gifted him every winter. He always wore it, not because it looked good, but because he knew it made me happy. That year, Trayvon brought Clarissa home, her first time appearing in a family picture. She smiled beautifully in that photo, but if you look closely, very closely, you'll see something I didn't notice then. Clarissa's eyes were not on the camera. She was scanning the room, looking at the furniture, the framed photos, the grandfather clock that belonged to Bernard's father on the mantel. She wasn't looking at my family. She was appraising my family, but I didn't know. If someone had told me back then that the woman standing next to my son, smiling so sweetly in that Christmas picture, would be the one to destroy my life, I would have laughed. I wouldn't have believed it. But that's the thing about tragedy. It never walks into your life with a loud noise. It arrives with beautiful smiles, sweet words, and promises like, "Let me help you." Bernard died in March of 2019, lung cancer, 67 years old. He'd smoked since he was 18, and though he quit for 10 years, it was too late. 3 months, from diagnosis to the day he passed, so fast, I barely had time to accept it. On his final night, he held my hand in his hospital room at the Cleveland Clinic and whispered, "Maggie, promise me something. Promise you'll take care of yourself. Don't make the kids worry. Don't become a burden." "Don't say that," I cried. "I've taken care of everything," he said, his breath weakening. "The pension, the insurance, the house. You'll be okay. Just live happily." I promised. But I didn't keep that promise. After Bernard passed, I began receiving his pension, $8,000 a month, a large amount. The house was paid off. I had savings, good health insurance. I truly believed I would never have to worry about money again. Later that year, Trayvon and Clarissa got married. It felt a little rushed. Bernard hadn't even been gone for a full year. But Trayvon said Clarissa helped him get through a hard time. I wanted to believe it was a good thing. At the wedding, Clarissa pulled me aside. "Mom, you know how much I love Trayvon, right? I'll take care of him, and I'll take care of you too. We're family." I hugged her. I was grateful. I thought I was lucky. I didn't know that inside her handbag that day was a piece of paper folded into quarters. I only found out months later, when I saw it inside an old notebook Clarissa had forgotten. "Mrs. Margaret, assets, house, approximately $180,000, pension $8,000 per month, savings $150,000 to $200,000, estimate, life insurance, ask Trayvon. Age 66, average life expectancy 15 to 20 years. Note, optimization needed." Optimization. That word haunts me to this day. At first, everything seemed normal. Trayvon and Clarissa visited every week. Clarissa brought food, asked about my medication, my health. One day she said, "Mom should let me help manage your finances. I work in banking. I'm familiar with this stuff." She didn't work in banking. She was just a teller at the Buckeye Savings and Trust branch, but I didn't say anything. "Thank you,"
"But I'm fine," I responded. "I've been an accountant my whole life." Clarissa smiled, a smile that never touched her eyes. "I know, but you're older now. These things can be confusing." That was the first seed.
The next month, Clarissa began sitting beside me every time I paid bills. "Mom, why are you paying this much? I think they overcharged you." I pointed at the bill to explain, but she kept mumbling, "Well, go ahead and pay it, but next time, let me check it for you, okay?" Next time became every time. Then one day, she pointed to an envelope and told me I had missed a bill I knew I hadn't. But I started doubting myself. Summer of 2021, everything officially changed. Trayvon and Clarissa sat across from me in the living room. "Remember last week when you went to the store and forgot your wallet?" Clarissa asked. Yes, I remembered. I had to call Trayvon to help pay, and 2 weeks before that, she continued, you tried to unlock the door with your car key. I didn't remember that, but hearing her say it, I started to think maybe it happened, Mom, Trayvon said. We're worried about you. Maybe you need more help. I don't need help, I said, though my voice trembled. Clarissa slid right in, gentle in a way that felt terrifying. You just need to give me your ATM card. I'll handle everything. You just enjoy life. I should have asked, why? I should have called Aaliyah, but I was tired. No one ever expects their own family to hurt them, so I gave her the card. The biggest mistake of my life. The first month, everything seemed normal. Clarissa paid the bills, bought groceries, even bought me a new winter coat. But by the second month, the groceries decreased. By the third month, the electric bill was late. I called Trayvon. He said Clarissa forgot, but it took 3 more weeks before it was paid. By winter, Cleveland was cold enough to cut skin. Below freezing. Heavy snow. My house was set to 58 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm cold, I called Clarissa. Can you turn up the heat? Electricity is expensive, Mom. Just put on more sweaters. So I put on 1, then 2, then 3. At night, I slept with a beanie and gloves. My fridge grew emptier. Clarissa was always busy. I ate rice with ketchup. Morning, noon, night, I called Trayvon. Son, I need money for food. You have it, Mom. Clarissa handles it. But the truth was, Clarissa was using the money for her own family, buying steak, lobster, wine from Whole Foods, not a single dollar for me. I grew thinner. I didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. Christmas 2022, Aaliyah came over and nearly choked when she saw me. Mom, what happened to you? I tried to answer, but Clarissa cut in. She's on a diet. The doctor said she should lose weight. I stayed silent. Not because I believed it, but because I was ashamed. Ashamed that I had handed over control. Ashamed that I had let myself fall into someone else's hands. Ashamed that Aaliyah might think I was foolish. That night, after Aaliyah left, I sat on the bathroom tile and cried. And Clarissa? She was lying on the couch, scrolling on her phone, booking tickets to Hawaii. For you to truly understand what I went through, I have to tell you about the small details. The things no one sees. The things people don't post online, don't write in bank reports, but slowly strip a person down, piece by piece. My mornings started at 5, not because I had slept enough, but because it was so cold I couldn't keep sleeping. I lay there, counting the layers of blankets on me. 4 blankets, plus Bernard's old winter coat. And still, the cold seeped into my bones. Every time I tried to sit up, I felt dizzy. The room spun. I had to hold onto the headboard and wait for the world to stop turning before I dared to stand. In the mirror, a stranger stared back at me. Skin ashen like dust. Hair thin and brittle, teeth beginning to loosen. A bruise on my cheek I didn't remember getting. I no longer showered every day. Hot water cost money. Clarissa said so. So I only allowed myself to shower twice a week. Go in, turn the water on, rinse off, get out. 5 minutes. I watched the clock. I didn't dare take longer. Breakfast was half a cup of rice. I cooked a small pot on Sunday and divided it throughout the week. By Friday, the rice started to taste slightly sour, but I still ate it.
I couldn't waste anything. I had something I called the water game. When the hunger got too strong, I drank water so much that my stomach filled to the brim, just enough to push the hunger back for a while. I drank until the nausea rose in my throat, then lay down and waited for the hunger to settle. There was 1 week when I had only 1 bag of rice and 2 tomatoes left. I rationed everything. How much rice per day, how many slices of tomato I could have. I cut the tomatoes into the thinnest slices possible, trying to stretch the feeling of eating something other than plain rice. On the 5th day, 1 tomato rotted. I sank onto the kitchen floor and cried. Not just because of the tomato, but because it meant 1 more meal gone, 1 more tiny chance to feel like I was still living as a normal human being disappearing with it. Mrs. Jenkins, my neighbor, would sometimes leave food on my doorstep. A container of soup, a few slices of bread. She never said anything. She'd just leave it and go. I think she knew. But like me, she didn't know how to start the conversation. Once I found $20 in the pocket of an old coat I sat on my bed, holding the bill, crying from joy. But when I got to the supermarket, I only dared to buy rice and dried beans. The cheapest things, the things that lasted the longest. At the checkout, the cashier looked at my basket, just rice and beans, then looked up at my thin face and the worn-out sweater I was wearing. "Do you have a membership card?" "No." "Let me use mine for you. It'll save you 10%. That small gesture made me cry the whole walk home. You know, people often think elder abuse is yelling, hitting, dramatic scenes in hospital hallways. But sometimes it's simply an empty refrigerator, an unpaid electric bill, an old woman slicing a tomato into thin pieces just to make 1 more day bearable. None of that shows up on paperwork, but your body, your heart, your soul, remember it all. There were days I didn't get out of bed. I lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering, why did Bernard leave me alone? Why didn't Trayvon see that I was withering right in front of him? Why wasn't I brave enough to save myself? One February afternoon, I sat on a bench in the park watching children play. Their laughter echoed, sounding just like Trayvon and Aaliyah's when they were little. A woman, maybe around Aaliyah's age, sat beside me. "Are those your grandkids?" she asked, pointing at the children. "No," I said softly. "I just like watching them play." She looked at me more closely, her gaze lingering on my sunken cheeks, my thin hands. "Are you okay? Do you need any help?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell her everything. Wanted to say that I was hungry, cold, scared, and didn't know who to call. But in the end, I only smiled. "I'm fine." She didn't believe me, but she nodded and left me alone. That night, I held Bernard's red sweater, the one I had given him for Christmas 2014. I lifted it to my nose, inhaling deeply, hoping for even a faint trace of his scent. But now it smelled only of mildew and time. "Bernard," I whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't keep my promise to you." Spring came, and I started. Seeing him, I knew it wasn't real. I knew it was just my exhausted mind clinging to someone. But that didn't make the feeling any less real. I saw him standing in the corner of the room, saw him sitting in his favorite chair, saw him looking at me with sad eyes as if asking, "How did you let yourself become like this, Maggie?" There was one thing Clarissa didn't take, my photo albums. She wanted to throw them out, saying they took up space and no one looks at them anymore. I hid them under my bed. Every night I pulled the album out, flipped through each page. Bernard when he was young, strong, smiling brightly. Trayvon as a child, before he learned how to look away when I needed help. Aaliyah on her graduation day, eyes shining, her whole future ahead of her. And me. In those old photos, I was fuller, skin glowing. My smile came from deep inside, eyes bright, happy. I looked at those pictures and could only wonder, when did that woman disappear? On the worst nights, I opened the drawer of my bedside table. Inside was the bottle of sleeping pills the doctor prescribed after Bernard died.
I had counted 37 pills. I sat on the bed, the bottle in my hand, and wondered, was that the answer? Would Bernard forgive me if I gave up like this? But then I thought of Aaliyah, thought of her face if she got the news, thought of how she would blame herself for the rest of her life. And I thought of Clarissa. If I died, she would win. I put the bottle back in the drawer. Not today, not yet. But I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't go on like this forever. Someone had to see. Someone had to realize. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon in April 2023, the doorbell rang. Aaliyah stood on the porch, arms full of grocery bags. In that moment, everything began to change. I just didn't know yet that it wasn't only my life that would change, but Clarissa's entire world was about to collapse. I consider it fair payment for allowing her to live in this house. Allowing. My house. Those two words sliced through the air. Aaliyah's face suddenly went blank. She removed her gold earrings, slowly, and placed them into her bag. A signal that never meant anything good. When Aaliyah took off her earrings, something big was about to happen. "Mom," Aaliyah said, her voice low but sharp as a blade, "get your coat, right now." Clarissa jerked away from the doorframe, raising her hand. "Wait. I wasn't talking to you." Aaliyah cut her off without even looking at her. "Mom, we're leaving." I reached for my coat, but my hands were shaking too much to get the sleeves on. Clarissa immediately stepped in, blocking the way. "She's not going anywhere. We have an arrangement." "An arrangement?" Aaliyah looked at her as if she were some strange creature. "You call starving a 70-year-old woman an arrangement?" From behind her, Trayvon appeared. My son stood behind his wife, placing a hand on Clarissa's shoulder, a silent calm down. "Mom," Trayvon said quietly, "maybe you should stay. Clarissa's right. Money needs to be managed." "Managed?" Aaliyah spun toward him. "You call stealing pension money management? You see Mom wearing 3 sweaters and think that's normal? You see a fridge that's completely empty and think that's fine?" Trayvon stepped back. "You don't understand. Clarissa said—" "I don't care what Clarissa said," Aaliyah shouted, her voice exploding like shattering glass. "Our mother looks like a survivor of a famine. When did you become the kind of man who watches his own mother die and does nothing?" Aaliyah grabbed my hand. "We're leaving." "You can't take her," Clarissa said, this time with real panic in her voice. "I have rights." "Rights? What rights?" Aaliyah snapped. "You never had any legal authority. All you did was take her ATM card and make up stories so everyone thought you did." Aaliyah smirked, a cold, humorless smile. "Let's see what the court thinks about that." "The court?" Clarissa's face drained of color. "The court. Lawyers, police," Aaliyah said. "What do you think this is? Elder abuse is a criminal offense." There is one thing abusers of the elderly always forget. Victims are not always alone. They only need one person to finally see the truth. And when that person is a daughter raised in hardship, resilient, and carrying both the heart and the strength of her father. This battle is no longer one against one. In that moment, I looked at Aaliyah and understood. The day Clarissa destroyed my family was the same day she awakened my strongest protector. As we reached the car, I turned back to look at the house, the place Bernard and I had bought 45 years earlier with so much hope, the place where I taught my children to walk, where we decorated the Christmas tree every year, a place that was once heaven, now a prison. Aaliyah helped me into the car and gently fastened my seatbelt, the same way I used to do for her when she was little. Her hands were trembling, but her eyes were not. As she walked around to the driver's side, I saw tears rolling down her cheeks. She wiped them quickly, trying to hide them. "Sweetheart," I whispered. "I'm sorry." "No." Aaliyah turned to me, her voice firm. "Don't apologize. None of this is your fault." "But I let—"
You were exploited. Aaliyah's voice cracked. How long have you been like this? Since a few months ago. A few months? Aaliyah whispered, her face going pale. Just a few months and you look like this? At Christmas, Clarissa said you were dieting, and I believed her. I should have known. You couldn't have known, I said. No, Aaliyah shook her head. I'm your daughter. I'm supposed to protect you. And I failed. You're here now, I replied. Aaliyah took a deep breath, steadying herself. Mom, you need to trust me for the next 3 months. Don't tell anyone what we're doing, okay? I looked into her eyes. I saw determination, anger, a quiet fire of vengeance. What are you planning? I asked. Aaliyah answered without hesitation. To make Clarissa and Trayvon regret it, to take back every dollar they stole, and to make sure they never hurt anyone ever again. As the car pulled away from the driveway, I glanced back at the window. Clarissa stood there, clutching her chest, eyes fixed on us. Even from afar, I could see it clearly. She wasn't worried. Not yet. She had no idea that everything was about to crumble beneath her feet.
Aaliyah didn't say a word the entire drive. It wasn't until the car turned into Cleveland Clinic that I finally spoke. You don't need to take me to the hospital, sweetheart. I'm just tired. Aaliyah turned to me, her eyes so tense that my throat tightened. Mom, she asked, when was the last time you ate a proper meal? I opened my mouth, but I couldn't remember. You're coming inside with me. Don't argue. The emergency room was packed. When the nurse asked, Aaliyah simply said I was dizzy and exhausted. Not entirely a lie. Within 20 minutes, they took me into an exam room. A young doctor checked me. A nurse took my blood pressure. But the most terrifying moment was when I stepped on the scale. I looked at Aaliyah. 47 kilos. I used to be 62. Mrs. Reddick, when did you start losing weight? The doctor asked. Recently, I haven't had much appetite. I lied. The truth was, I was always hungry. Aaliyah pulled out her phone and showed the doctor last year's Christmas photo. Me smiling, face full, eyes bright, a completely different woman. The doctor immediately ordered blood tests. While waiting for results, a woman in a gray blouse knocked and entered. Sheila Norwood, social worker. Her kind eyes made something inside my chest crack open. Your daughter said you've been having difficulties at home, Sheila said gently. Are you comfortable sharing with me? I looked at Aaliyah. She nodded. And so, I couldn't hold it in anymore. Everything poured out. Clarissa taking all my pension, the empty refrigerator, the 2-week rice ration, Trayvon standing by watching. Sheila listened, writing down every word, and I cried for the first time in months. The doctor returned, his face serious. Mrs. Reddick, you're severely malnourished. Your vitamin D is nearly 0. B12 is at a dangerous level. 15 kilos lost in 6 months. Your body is consuming itself to survive. Aaliyah took pictures of everything, the test results, the notes, the nutritional chart. She worked with the precision I once taught her when she was little. Mom needs to be admitted, the doctor suggested. Aaliyah shook her head. No, I'm taking her home, but I need copies of everything, every result, every note, every document. The doctor and Sheila exchanged a glance, understanding more than words could say. Of course, Sheila replied, and I'll be filing a report with Adult Protective Services. This is elder abuse. It's a crime. A crime. That word thundered in my head. I had always thought Clarissa was just difficult, just making bad choices. But hearing it called by its true name changed something inside me forever. 2 hours later, we left the hospital with a thick stack of documents and new prescriptions. Aaliyah drove to a bank I'd never been to, a small branch near the University District. A banker named Gregory helped me open a new account. My name only, my signature only, transfer a portion of Mom's pension here, Aaliyah said. Just a small amount, enough that Clarissa won't notice. This is Mom's money, hers alone. That night, in Aaliyah's warm kitchen, Sitting in front of a real bowl of soup, I watched her open her laptop. "Mom, you need to see this. It's hard, but you have to know." The search history on my computer, not mine, Clarissa's. Average lifespan, elderly women. Estate division timeline. How to obtain guardianship. Elder malnutrition. 2 years. 2 years. Clarissa spent researching how to make me die faster. My hands shook so badly I had to put the spoon down. Aaliyah closed the laptop and took my hand. "Mom, we're going to fix this, step by step, but you have to trust me, okay?" I looked into her eyes and saw the determination I once had in my youth. "What are you planning, Aaliyah?" She answered instantly, "Whatever it takes." Sometimes betrayal doesn't just hurt you, it opens your eyes. And when the truth begins to surface, you don't only see what they already took, you see what they were planning to take next. That is the moment a person transforms from a victim to a survivor, and from a survivor to a fighter. The next morning, while I was eating the scrambled eggs Aaliyah made, she was on the phone. I could only catch fragments. Elder protection laws. Urgent consultation. Documents are ready. "Mom, you have an appointment with attorney Desmond Patrick at 11, Aaliyah said. "He specializes in exactly your type of case." His office was in an old brick building downtown, polished wooden floors, walls covered in certificates. He was around 50, salt and pepper hair, and the look he gave me in the first 3 seconds told me he understood everything. "Mrs. Reddick," he said, shaking my hand gently. "Aaliyah has told me the basics, but before we discuss legal strategy, we need to establish the most important thing. Are you willing to take a cognitive test?" My heart sank. "Do you think my mind is failing?" "No," he shook his head. "I believe you are completely competent, but Clarissa will absolutely claim you're confused, manipulated, or impaired. We need to shut that down immediately." 3 hours of testing, memory, reasoning, pattern recognition, following instructions, like a final exam. My hands were damp with sweat. When he reviewed the results, Mr. Patrick smiled for the first time. "Your cognitive ability is excellent, Mrs. Reddick, above average for your age. Now, let's talk about what they've done to you." Aaliyah spread the bank statements across the table. Mr. Patrick put on his glasses, studying each page. His face darkened. 2 years, he said. "This is systematic theft over 2 years. Based on the numbers, my estimate is at least $200,000. I felt dizzy. 200,000. Pension money. The money Bernard and I saved so I would never have to worry in old age. "I'll bring in a forensic accountant," Mr. Patrick said. "We'll track every dollar." Within 2 weeks, Tamara Ellington, financial investigator, analyzed every transaction. Then she handed me a detailed printout. $3,000 handbags, $8,000 Hawaii trip, $100 restaurant dinners, all paid with money meant to keep me alive. "Enough for criminal charges," Tamara said quietly. "Fraud, elder abuse, financial exploitation." Mr. Patrick got to work. He set up an irrevocable trust and explained every step. Our house, the one Bernard and I bought in 1980, the investment account, 40 years of savings, the life insurance, all placed into a legal structure for protection with Aaliyah as the sole trustee. "It's done," he said. "Clarissa cannot access a single asset now. No rights, no loopholes, locked permanently." I signed each page. My hands trembled so much that Aaliyah had to steady my wrist. Each signature felt like reclaiming a piece of the life Clarissa tried to steal. The hardest part was the new will. Mr. Patrick drafted it exactly as we discussed. But when I reached the part stating Trayvon would receive only $1, my throat closed. The little boy who used to crawl into my lap during nightmares now stood beside the woman who starved me. "Are you certain?" Mr. Patrick asked softly. I remembered Trayvon's face that day, calm as Clarissa said I was dieting. Calm in front of an empty fridge. No objection. No protection. I took a breath. I'm certain. But Aaliyah wasn't done. She drove around the neighborhood collecting statements from people I didn't think anyone noticed. Jerry, the mailman, saw me digging through recycling bins for 5-cent bottles. He recorded the exact date and time. Lisa, the pharmacist, had records showing I stopped buying my blood pressure medication because I couldn't afford it. Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor, witnessed my weight loss, the dark house with lights off to save electricity, while Clarissa drove a brand new car. Everyone saw it, Aaliyah said when she returned. Everyone knew something was wrong, and they're willing to testify. That night, Mr. Patrick called. Everything is ready, Mrs. Reddick. Your assets are protected. The will is filed. The evidence of abuse is strong. Now we wait for the right moment. I looked at Aaliyah. In the living room where I had been sleeping on her sofa for 3 weeks, I was gaining weight again, growing stronger. When? I asked. Mr. Patrick smiled, a steel-edged smile. Very soon. Very soon, it turned out, meant Saturday morning. Aaliyah was loading the last of my boxes into the car. I stood in the new guest room she had prepared for me. Fresh towels, a small television, a neatly made bed with clean sheets. In that moment, something in my chest finally loosened for the first time in months. The room was warm. The bed was soft. Downstairs, the fridge was full of real food. And most important of all, I was allowed to eat whenever I was hungry. I sat down on the edge of the bed and started to cry. Not the kind of crying where you shed a few tears, but the kind that makes your ribs ache and your breath hitch. About 20 minutes later, Aaliyah walked in and saw me curled up like a child. She didn't say anything. She just sat down and held me. I cried, and then she cried with me. "You're safe now," Aaliyah whispered. "I promise." That afternoon, I ate my first real lunch in months. A turkey sandwich, lettuce, tomatoes, an apple, and a glass of milk. My stomach twisted from not being used to something so luxurious anymore, but it was the pain of being alive, not the pain of hunger. Aaliyah sat across from me, eating while typing something on her phone, each tap slow and very deliberate. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Letting Trayvon know that you're living with me now." She held out the screen so I could read the message before she sent it. "Mom will be living with me from now on. You and Clarissa no longer need to act as caregivers. Thank you for the help in the past." Those 2 words, thank you, polite, concise, but they landed like a cold metal period at the end of a chapter. Not 5 minutes later, Aaliyah's phone rang. She declined. It rang again. She declined again. Then the messages came pouring in. "Where is she? You can't just take her like that. We need to talk. Call me now." Aaliyah turned off the screen and placed the phone face down on the table. "They're going to come here," she said. "Probably in a day or 2. When they do, I need you to let me handle it. Can you do that?" I nodded, though my hands were still trembling, and just like she said, Monday afternoon, they came. I was reading on the porch when the doorbell rang. Then loud, urgent knocking followed. Aaliyah had installed a doorbell camera the day before, so she checked her phone first, then cracked the door, only enough to block them from coming in. "We need to see Mom," Trayvon said, his voice pulled tight. Clarissa didn't bother with pretense. "Where is she? Where's the pension? It didn't hit the account this month." Aaliyah stayed calm. "Mom is here, and she's safe. Her pension is now being deposited into a different account, one only she can access." Clarissa's face flushed red. "You can't do that. I have power of attorney. I manage her finances." "Actually, no." Aaliyah tilted her head. "You never had it. You just took her card and convinced everyone you did. But you never had any legal authority whatsoever." From where I sat, I could see Clarissa's face clearly. She was shaking, fists balled tight, as if she were waiting for a spark to explode. "I care for her," Clarissa snapped. "I deserve to be compensated. Do you know how much it costs to hire a professional caregiver?" "Care?" Aaliyah scoffed softly. "You call starving her in a freezing house care?" Trayvon finally spoke. "Aaliyah, you're overreacting. Mom's fine." "Fine?" Aaliyah pulled out her phone and opened a photo. "Say that again after you look at this." She held the screen up between them. "Mom weighed 104 pounds when I took her to the hospital. She lost 33 pounds in 6 months. The doctor's note says, severe malnutrition and significant neglect." I could see the muscles in Clarissa's jaw twitch violently. "You had no right to take her to the hospital without telling us," Clarissa screeched. "We'll sue. Go ahead," Aaliyah cut in, her voice sharp as glass. "I'd love to hear you explain to a judge how you managed finances by stealing nearly $200,000 of her pension while she ate rice cakes and ketchup 3 meals a day." The color drained from Clarissa's face so fast, it looked like someone unplugged her. "I didn't steal anything," she screamed. "I paid bills, Interesting," Aaliyah said, eyes never leaving her. "Because the forensic accountant traced every dollar, $3,000 handbags, an $8,000 Hawaii trip, hundreds of dollars on restaurant meals, while my mother was digging through recycling bins for 5-cent bottles." Trayvon turned to look at his wife. Confusion, shock, and for the first time in 2 years, a flicker of doubt. Clarissa tried to regain momentum. "Ridiculous! You're manipulating an old woman when our lawyer—" Aaliyah raised her phone again. "Before you say anything else about lawyers, you should know I recorded this entire conversation." Clarissa froze. "And," Aaliyah continued, "we also have your search history from Mom's computer. Life expectancy, elderly women. How long until you receive inheritance after a relative dies? Average time for asset distribution. 2 full years. You were calculating how long Mom would live before you could get her money." Clarissa's face went from red to ghost white. In under 3 seconds, "Leave my doorstep," Aaliyah said, voice low and blade sharp. "If you come back, I call the police for trespassing. If you contact my mother, I'll request a protective order. If you try anything legally, I'll turn every piece of evidence over to the prosecutor's office. Clear?" Trayvon practically had to drag Clarissa away. She was still shouting about rights, lawyers, and lawsuits. But the sound had collapsed, hollow, warped, desperate. Aaliyah shut the door. She leaned against it for a second, took a long breath, then turned toward me. Her hands trembled slightly. "It's done," she whispered. "Now, they know we're fighting back." Fighting sometimes doesn't mean throwing punches. It's sitting still and watching Clarissa's entire world come apart piece by piece, slowly, precisely, and irreversibly. On Tuesday morning, Mr. Patrick sent 3 formal letters to Trayvon and Clarissa. Aaliyah waited until she saw the delivered confirmation from FedEx before she poured orange juice and set the glass down in front of me. "They'll get them at 10, she said. "Are you ready?" I didn't know. No one is ever truly ready to watch someone who's lived in their house for 4 years be stripped of everything. But I still nodded. At 10:45, Aaliyah's phone lit up. Clarissa was calling. My daughter put it on speaker. The screaming began before the word hello. Clarissa's voice was too high, too sharp, too frantic for me to separate words from breathing terms like manipulation, abuse, lawyer, take it to court were thrown around wildly without forming real sentences. Aaliyah patiently waited for her to run out of air. "Are you done?" she asked, her voice so calm it was frightening. "You can't do this!" Clarissa shrieked. "You manipulated a confused old woman into signing away everything. No judge will believe this." Aaliyah answered crisply. My mother completed a full cognitive assessment with a neuropsychologist. Result? Above average for her age group. No one is confused here, Clarissa. My mother is just an elderly woman who finally escaped a thief. I never stole anything. $200,000, Aaliyah said, enunciating every word. That's the figure traced by the forensic accountant. Every transaction, every vacation, every designer bag, while my mother lived on rice cakes and tap water. I heard Clarissa go quiet for a few seconds, the kind of silence where you can feel the truth dropping like a boulder. Then her tone changed. No more screaming, no more aggression, just calculation. "Let me talk to her," Clarissa said softly. "To his mother, alone." "Not a chance," Aaliyah replied. "Then my lawyer will be in touch." Aaliyah hung up without a goodbye. She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw something I had never seen before. Not anger, not satisfaction, but a solemn determination. The kind of resolve that carries a person all the way to the end. The days that followed felt like standing in a sealed room, watching the sky outside grow darker layer by layer. So quiet it was eerie. Clarissa went silent for 24 hours. Aaliyah and I ate dinner, watched TV, drank tea, but we both knew it was only the calm before the landslide. The next letters, the next calls, were on their way. And they were. On Wednesday morning, the fourth letter arrived, this time from Tamara Ellington, the forensic accountant. I wasn't there when Clarissa received it, but I knew the moment it happened, thanks to the phone ringing Thursday morning. She wasn't screaming this time. She was crying so hard her voice broke apart. "They miscalculated," Clarissa sobbed. "Just give me time. I'll pay it back. I'll borrow, please. Just make this stop." Aaliyah replied in the same steady tone, "You should discuss that with your lawyer." I thought that would be the worst Clarissa had to face. I was wrong. That night I got a call from Trayvon. He didn't call Aaliyah, didn't text first. He dialed the same number I'd had for 40 years, the one he used to call in high school whenever he was scared or in trouble. "Mom." His voice was cracked, weak, like someone whose strength had been drained. "Mom, please tell me Clarissa is lying. She said she only married me for money, your money. She said it right to my face." I heard the choking sound, the sound of a man watching his marriage shatter. "She said I wasted 4 years of my youth waiting for an inheritance, and now there's nothing." I swallowed. My throat hurt. "Did you know, Trayvon?" I asked. "Did you know she took my pension? That I lost all that weight? That I couldn't afford food? That I wore 3 sweaters because I was cold?" Mom, I saw the empty fridge," he stammered. "But Clarissa said you were stubborn, that you refused to eat, that you were doing it on purpose. I closed my eyes. "Yes, you believed her." Trayvon hung up without saying goodbye. 3 days later, Aaliyah told me the divorce papers had been filed. The news came from both Mr. Patrick and the court system. Trayvon never spoke to me again, but as Mr. Patrick said, that was only the tip of the iceberg. He laid a document on Aaliyah's kitchen table, a printout from the insurance company. "Clarissa opened a life insurance policy, on you," he said quietly but sharply. $500,000, 3 years ago. I looked down at the paper, saw my name, saw Clarissa listed as the beneficiary, and the signature was not mine. "I never signed this," I whispered. "I know," Mr. Patrick said, jaw tightening. "Fraudulent insurance, combined with her search history and the severe malnutrition you endured, can be used to establish intent." "Intent for what?" I asked, though I already knew. Aaliyah placed her hand on top of mine. "Mom, she was waiting for you to die." I went silent for a very long time. That sentence echoed in my head day after day, like a broken bell. A week later, Aaliyah finally said what we had both been thinking. "People need to know. People who could end up like you, they need to recognize the signs." So we went to the office of Sadi Turner, an investigative reporter at Fox 8 Cleveland who specialized in exposing elder abuse cases. Aaliyah had contacted her the week before, and Sadi agreed to meet. At first, Saad asked if I wanted to remain anonymous. But as I described the empty fridge, the 3 sweaters, Clarissa's spreadsheet calculating average life expectancy, and the forged signature, I realized anonymity no longer mattered. I wanted this story heard, so that someone might see themselves in me and get out sooner. "So you're willing to go on camera?" Sade asked. I nodded. On Thursday night, the story aired. Aaliyah and I sat on her couch, watching the segment showing everything I had been through. I heard my own voice through the mic. Hoarse but strong Saad interviewed the lawyer, the social worker, the abuse experts. The footage was powerful, clear, and as brutal as the truth itself. My phone rang constantly throughout the broadcast. Church friends, former co-workers, Mrs. Patterson from next door crying and apologizing for not doing more. But the call that had the most impact went to Aaliyah's phone. 3 people from the bank where Clarissa worked called, confirming they had seen the story and recognized the details. One of them said Clarissa often bragged that a big inheritance was coming in a few years. On Friday morning, Clarissa's employer called her in. By noon, she was terminated. By evening, all of Clarissa's social media accounts disappeared. People who had gone to Hawaii with her on my pension money suddenly couldn't remember who they went with. And there was more. It was like watching a skyscraper collapse in slow motion. No explosions, no smoke, just ruins. The criminal trial began in October, 6 months after everything came to light. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined. Hard wooden benches, harsh white fluorescent lights that made everyone look more tired than they probably were. I sat in the front row with Aaliyah, watching Clarissa walk in with her lawyer. Clarissa had lost weight. Her clothes looked cheaper than before, and the entire time she didn't look at me even once. The prosecutor, Ms. Daniels, spoke in a low voice that carried real authority. She presented bank reports showing nearly $200,000 withdrawn in a systematic pattern, then the medical records proving my malnutrition. Clarissa's computer search history was projected on a large screen for everyone to see. Clarissa's defense attorney tried to argue that she was managing the money, not stealing it, that those searches were just harmless curiosity, that the life insurance policy was only to ensure my financial security. Then they brought up the spreadsheet. Clarissa had created an Excel file calculating how much inheritance she could expect under different life expectancy scenarios. If I died at 70, one figure. If 75, another figure. If 80, less, because of the cost of upkeep over more years. She had highlighted the 70 years old row in yellow. I was 68 when Clarissa made that spreadsheet. The judge was a woman in her early 60s, steel gray hair, reading glasses. She sat there, listening to 3 days of testimony without much change in her expression. When she sentenced Clarissa, her voice was as cold as steel. 4 years in state prison, $500,000 in restitution and punitive damages. This amount cannot be discharged in bankruptcy. Ms. Clarissa Reddick, you engaged in a systematic pattern of exploitation and endangerment of an elderly woman for your own financial gain. You falsified documents, committed fraud, and based on the digital record, you appear to have considered hastening the victim's death. This court finds your actions deeply reprehensible. Clarissa burst into tears. Her lawyer placed a hand on her shoulder, but she shrugged him off. As for me, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt empty, exhausted, and ready to go home. Aaliyah drove me back in silence. 4 years, $500,000. I was supposed to feel like we had won, but all I felt was as if I had just finished a race far too long, and even though I had crossed the finish line, my legs were still shaking. People like to think that when the judge strikes the gavel, that's the end, that justice has been served and everything goes back to normal. But the truth is, nothing goes back to anything. Clarissa went to prison. The money was ordered to be repaid. The news cycle moved on. Only I remained, trying to figure out how to live in a body that had learned to be hungry, a mind that had learned to be afraid, and a heart that had grown used to, waiting to be betrayed. In the weeks that followed, I had to learn how to live again. The first night after the trial, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the warm sofa at Aaliyah's house, staring at the ceiling as if it might cave in at any moment. Just before dawn, I got up, went downstairs, and opened the refrigerator. A carton of milk, a box of eggs, cheese, bread, fruit, everything was still there. I closed the fridge. Half an hour later, I opened it again. I counted everything. My brain refused to believe it. Some part of me still believed that if I didn't check, by morning everything would vanish, that if I didn't save, ration, hold out just a little longer, I'd be left starving again. One night, Aaliyah got up for a glass of water and found me sitting on the kitchen floor, a bag of rice open in front of me. I was scooping tiny piles of rice out with a spoon, sorting them into little mounds. "Mom?" Her voice was so soft I almost didn't hear it. "What are you doing?" I need to know how much is left," I said. "I have to divide it for each day, so it'll last." Aaliyah knelt down beside me. "You don't have to do that anymore," she said. "This house will always have food. There will always be enough for you. Always." "But what if it doesn't?" I looked up at her, tears spilling over. "What if one day I open the fridge and it's just ketchup and rice again?" She pulled me into her arms. "That's not going to happen, Mom," Aaliyah whispered. "I promise. You're safe now." But the feeling of safe did not arrive as quickly as the judge's sentence. It came slowly, very slowly. My therapist, Dr. Chen, was the one who helped me call what I'd been through by its real name. "Mrs. Reddick, what you experienced is trauma," she said. "Your body and brain have been in survival mode for a very long time. It will take time to teach them that now. You are safe." We worked together for months. We talked about fear, we talked about shame, we talked about guilt. "Why do you feel guilty?" Dr. Chen asked. "Because I allowed it to happen," I answered. "Because I gave Clarissa my card. Because I didn't fight. Because I didn't call Aaliyah sooner." "You were exploited by someone you trusted," Dr. Chen said. "That is not your fault. Your daughter-in-law spent years constructing that situation. That is deliberate manipulation, not your failure." It took many weeks, many therapy sessions, before I even began to believe that might be true. The milestones came slowly, like small lights switching on in a dark house. The first time I opened the fridge without counting everything inside. The first time I ate a meal without whispering in my head, "Is this too wasteful?" The first time I slept through the night without jolting awake, heart pounding, from dreams of being back in that 68-degree house. The real turning point came one afternoon in January. Aaliyah and I were baking, using my mother's old recipe. We were laughing about something small, so small that now I can't even remember what it was. I just remember stirring the batter and suddenly realizing I was happy. Not happy despite, not happy, although everything happened. Just happy. I stopped mid-stir, the ladle suspended in the air. "You okay, Mom?" Aaliyah asked. "Sweetheart," I said softly, "for the first time in more than 2 years, I feel like myself again." Aaliyah set her spoon down and came over to hug me. We stood there in the kitchen, both crying and laughing, while the first batch of cookies burned in the oven. And this time, instead of feeling wasteful, I laughed, because I knew we had more flour to make another batch. We had more time to try again, and most importantly, I still had myself to begin again with. The gala was held in the ballroom of a downtown Cleveland hotel. Crystal chandeliers glowed above us, white tablecloths stretched across every table, and the lights reflected off the glasses like tiny stars. I wore the navy blue dress Aaliyah had bought for me. My weight had returned, over 10 kilograms gained back since the days I wrapped myself in 3 sweaters inside a 68-degree house. When I looked in the mirror that evening, I saw myself, or at least something close to it, and in a way, that alone felt like a kind of revenge. When they invited me on stage, in front of 300 people, my hands shook so badly I had to grip the edge of the podium. I had planned to read from my notes, but once I saw the faces waiting for me to speak, I knew those pages weren't enough. I began telling the story. I talked about the empty refrigerator, the expired milk, and the 3 packets of ketchup. I talked about wearing 3 sweaters because I couldn't afford heat, despite receiving $8,000 a month in pension. I talked about the spreadsheet Clarissa created, calculating how long I would live and highlighting the age 70 row in yellow. I told them about digging through my neighbor's recycling bin for 5-cent bottles, about counting grains of rice to stretch a meal, about drinking water until my stomach swelled, just to trick my hunger. My voice cracked when I spoke about Trayvon, my son, who had watched me waste away while choosing to believe in the comfort Clarissa gave him instead of the truth right in front of him. In the front row, a woman wiped her eyes. So did the person next to her. I took a deep breath. "Tonight," I said, "I stand here because of my daughter, who looked straight at the truth when everyone else turned away, because she documented every detail, built the case, and fought for me when I no longer had the strength to fight for myself. But out there are thousands of elderly people suffering the same thing. They don't have an Aaliyah. No one sees them. No one asks questions." I scanned the room. So I'm asking you, be that person. Pay attention to elderly neighbors. Check on your relatives. Ask the uncomfortable questions when something feels wrong. Don't wait until it's too late, like I did. If you see an older person suddenly losing weight, wearing multiple layers indoors in the summer, avoiding conversations about money, don't assume it's just their personal business. They might be being robbed, abused, starved. And they might be ashamed, afraid, or too confused to save themselves. The standing ovation began before I even finished my last sentence. 300 people rose to their feet. I stood at the podium, looking at them, and for the first time in my life, I understood that my suffering, now, had meaning. The next morning, the video of my speech was posted online. By noon, it had 10,000 views. By evening, 50,000. My phone filled with messages from names I had never seen before, elderly women thanking me for giving them courage to speak up. Grown children realizing their parents' caregivers were secretly draining their accounts. Social workers sharing the video to warn clients who were too afraid to talk. I replied to every message I could. Each thank you felt like reclaiming another piece of my life Clarissa had tried to steal. As the video continued to spread, local media began contacting Aaliyah. A podcast on elder abuse prevention invited me to speak. Churches invited both of us to talk at community gatherings. Slowly, I began to see what Aaliyah had seen all along. This story was no longer just ours. It had become something that could save someone. Help a child notice the signs. Make a neighbor call the police at the right moment. And that growing impact led to the hardest moment. But the moment I needed. The moment Trayvon came back. 3 weeks after the video went viral, Trayvon showed up. No call, no text. He just parked in front of my house. I looked out the window. My first instinct was to step back, but I stayed where I was. I had spent a lifetime being afraid. But not anymore. Trayvon walked up the steps slowly, hands in his pockets. He looked older than his age, worn out, heavy. "Mom," he said, "I saw your speech, and I need you to know how sorry I am." "Trayvon," I said softly, "I know you're sorry. Then, please forgive me. I know I did wrong, very wrong, but I'm still your son." I looked at him for a long moment. The man standing in front of me had once been the little boy I held during thunderstorms, the child I nursed through fevers, the son I trusted would protect his mother. You saw me starving, I said quietly, and you did nothing. You saw me wearing 3 sweaters in the house and didn't ask why. You gave my financial information to a woman who was calculating how long I'd live in order to get my money. For 2 whole years, every single day, you chose Clarissa over me. Trayvon swallowed. She manipulated me. She lied about everything. Clarissa didn't blind you, Trayvon. I looked into his eyes for the first time in years. She didn't make you ignore the truth in front of you. You saw the empty fridge that Christmas. You saw my face hollowing out. But you chose to believe Clarissa because it made life easier, because facing the truth meant you would have to act, and you didn't want to. I stood up. My legs were steady. My voice didn't shake. Some betrayals cannot be forgiven. Now you need to go. Trayvon opened his mouth, ready to say something, but behind me, Aaliyah stepped into the doorway. He looked at the 2 of us, paused for a long moment, then turned around and walked back to his car. I watched until he disappeared down the street. A feeling of closure washed through my chest. Not anger, not regret, just done. Aaliyah stood beside me. Mom, are you okay? Yes, I said. And the surprising thing was, I realized it was true. Sweetheart, I think this time I really am okay. I live with Aaliyah now, in the house she bought last year using the trust fund, my own fund. After careful investing, it's worth $2.5 million. When I die, Aaliyah will receive half. The other half will go to the Elder Abuse Prevention Fund and 3 other charities dedicated to protecting vulnerable seniors. Trayvon gets $1. Clarissa, nothing but debt. She was released from prison last month after serving 3 years for good behavior. She now works at a discount store for minimum wage. The $500,000 restitution remains almost untouched, and she will likely spend the rest of her life paying it back. I know, because Tamara still sends me quarterly updates. I am 72 years old, healthy. Twice a week I volunteer at the senior center. Thanks to my story, I've helped 6 people realize they were being financially abused. 6 people, 6 lives, that might have ended up like mine if they hadn't heard my story and learned what signs to look for. I realized the greatest revenge isn't Clarissa losing everything. The greatest revenge is that I survived. And in that survival, I've become a voice for those who cannot speak. Every person I help, every family I protect, every single dollar directed toward abuse prevention organizations, that is the revenge that matters. Sometimes, justice isn't found in punishment. Sometimes, it's in turning pain into purpose and proving that the people who tried to destroy you only made you stronger. A strange thing happens when your own pain begins to fade. You start noticing the small warning lights in other people's lives, signs that they are drowning just as you once were. And then you understand that your new strength isn't meant just for you. It's meant to be the outstretched hand you once wished you had. I began writing down every story, every person I met, not to remember their suffering, but to remind myself that what I went through wasn't meaningless. Last month, a woman named Dorothy came to the center. She was 75, painfully thin, hands trembling, eyes filled entirely with fear. Her son and daughter-in-law had taken the deed to her home and controlled all her money. No food, no heat, no escape. I sat with her for 3 hours. I listened. I believed her. No doubt, no hesitation. I can help you, I told her. And you don't have to do this alone. We'll do it together. I called Aaliyah. Aaliyah called Mr. Patrick. Mr. Patrick called Sheila. And the wheel began turning again, this time in the right direction. 3 months later, Dorothy was living with her biological daughter. The people who exploited her were facing charges. She had gained weight, looked healthier, and last week she brought a box of homemade cookies to the center. "For you," Dorothy said. "You saved my life." I squeezed her hand. "No, you saved yourself. You just needed someone to believe you." That is my work now, to believe, to listen, and to fight for those too weak to fight for themselves. Mr. Bernard told me before he died, "Live well, live happily." Back then, I couldn't keep that promise for long, but now I am keeping it fully. Every morning, I wake up in a warm house. I walk into the kitchen and see Aaliyah making coffee. We eat breakfast together, real eggs, buttered toast, fresh fruit. I don't count anymore. I don't portion. I simply eat and feel grateful for every bite. Then I go to the center, where people are waiting, people who need to hear that they're not crazy, not alone, and that someone will fight for them. At night, I come home, cook dinner with Aaliyah. We tell each other about our day, about the people I helped, about her work. And sometimes I suddenly realize this is the life I should have had long ago. Warm, nourishing, safe, purposeful. Clarissa tried to take all of it. She tried to turn me into a number on a spreadsheet, an obstacle between her and an inheritance. But she failed. I'm still here, stronger, and with purpose. Every good day I live, every person I help, every story I tell, that is the real revenge. Not anger, not bitterness, but a statement. I survived, and in that survival I am changing the world, one person at a time. If this story touched you, if you know someone going through something similar, speak up. Call Adult Protective Services. Call the police. Call a lawyer. Don't wait until it's almost too late. Because every elderly person deserves to live their final years with dignity, safety, and love. No one deserves what Clarissa did to me. But if my story can prevent it from happening to someone else, then every painful moment was worth it. Turning pain into something meaningful. That is the best we can do with it. Thank you for listening. And remember, you're never too old to reclaim your life. If this story made you think, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next healing journey. Here, we rise together, one story at a time.